Welcome back to Field Notes, the podcast where we explore the people, strategy, and real-world decisions shaping infrastructure. I'm Abby Crawford, your host, and today's conversation is one I've been really looking forward to. Our guest is Ms. Pamela Sherwood, whose career sits right at the intersection of law and telecommunications and public policy. She works closely with communication providers and infrastructure teams, navigating some of the most complex regulatory and strategic challenges that we have in this industry. Pamela, I am so glad that you are here. Welcome to Field Notes.
Thanks, Abby. I'm so honored to be included among the guests that you've interviewed on your podcast so far. I know lawyers aren't always the most exciting guests, but I'm hopeful that I can share with your audience today how I view law and compliance as an enabler rather than a blocker in some of our most challenging business initiatives that we have today.
And that is why I am so excited to have your perspective, because we can kind of shift that mindset. This is awesome. So before we jump into industry dynamics and legal strategy, I always like to start with the human side of the story. So everyone in infrastructure seems to have a moment or a path that pulls them into this industry, and sometimes it's intentionally, sometimes it's accidentally. So let's start from the beginning. Law, telecommunications, public policy. It's a pretty crazy but powerful mix that you have going on. Was there a moment in your career when you realized that this is the lane that you want to be in?
You know, Abby, like so many of your guests, the intersection of law, public policy, and infrastructure wasn't plotted out as my destination when my parents asked, what do you want to be when you want to grow up? But I love it. It's complex. There's always something changing. There's a new technology. There's something new that is implicating the business. And there's a never ending list of acronyms. I don't know why we can't say the whole word, but I live in the world of RDOF and ARPA and BEAD and CPF, because apparently we like to have our own language. And it isn't just a happy accident that I landed where I did, but maybe it was. I mean, it was right time, right place. But I also think there's something about saying yes at the right moment when career opportunities present themselves. And I want to give you two examples that I think are really helpful that might sort of like shed light on how these intersections come together. So the first one was when I was practicing law right out of law school. And I had the opportunity to transition from just being a lawyer to actually being a lawyer and a business advocate, because I was practicing all sorts of law, including utility law, at the time that the Telecom Act was passed. That tells you how old I am. And I said yes to taking on a telecom client, and yes to learning a brand new area of law and understanding the complexity. But it's more than just saying yes, it's also taking advantage of every opportunity to learn as much as you can and become an expert in that area. Brand new area, and it gave me the opportunity to shape the way the regulations were being developed in a way that benefited the new entrants and competitors that were coming into the industry. And then the second major pivot point I had in my career where I said yes was the very instance that landed me right where I am now, which is the intersection of law, public policy, broadband grants, rural broadband development, and complex legal issues. So I said yes to moving over to Brightspeed at the very time when the ARPA grants and the CPF grants were being implemented. No one at Brightspeed was working in the grant area. It was a brand new company being stood up. And so I came over to not just learn the regulatory and compliance part of broadband grants, but how to apply for them, how to win them. And once we won them, how to stand up the team that design the compliance, work cross-functionally with the engineering and construction teams, our build partners, to be able to execute, deliver, report, and remain compliant on some very complex issues that really make a difference in customers' uses in their lives, right? The consequences of not doing it were significant, and the ways that we could shape it really made a difference to rural America.
It's so cool because this is exactly what people don't realize goes on behind the scenes, and also how important how all of your roles and all of the specialties that you have, they just intertwine and they work together to do something that we all rely on every single day. And I just think that's so cool to hear that perspective from you. So
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
think one of the hardest things is probably something that you in marketing do right. There is an art to being able to translate complexity
Mhm.
into simplicity. And when you do that, and then you have to explain how what seems simple on paper, right? They're rolling out a grant program. It seems simple on paper, but when it intersects with the real world business and how you operate and manage it, how you have to comply and report on it, being
Mhm.
able to explain that intersection in a way that you can find a solution or maybe modify the way they're developing the program really is, I think, the most difficult thing. But one of the things they've done right really can help influence the outcome and the end result in a way that really benefits the business.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's interesting because infrastructure isn't always the most obvious career path. People get into this industry, they tend to stay in it, is something I've realized. Even if you don't expect yourself to be there, you get in it and you realize how important it is and how it affects every area of our lives. And it's not always glamorous work, it's really hard. For you, what makes you stay in it?
Yeah, I think what the reason I stay in this is because there is always something new. Like over my career, I have migrated from just being a lawyer, right? I interpret the law, I write a brief, I advocate for the client, to being an integral part of the business.
Yeah.
So in this role that I'm in now, I came over not just to interpret what the grant program is, but to help develop and stand up compliance, to be that part of the business advisor and leader and work cross functionally. And I think that's what's exciting about the work that I do, as well as being able to do the advocacy and the public speaking and to help shape the rules. And now on the BEAD program, I'm working with all the state broadband offices as a partner to help translate compliance, explain what we're doing internally to build trust that we can provide them with the visibility, the accountability, and to be able to comply and deliver the product that they're looking for us to deliver for rural broadband.
You have had years and years and years of experience. And the question that I love to ask just about everyone in infrastructure is there had to be something, there had to be a lesson that you learned that has stuck with you and really shapes how you work today. What is that lesson?
I think that lesson for me is thinking strategically about problems that you can solve in advance for the company. I might give you a couple examples. So, for example, for those of us that are out there building networks and designs, thinking ahead for where the area is that you're going to be deploying fiber and understanding well in advance where you're going to need a permit or where you might need a pole attachment, and making sure that you're working with your partners in the legal or compliance team to make sure that those requirements are in place early and often. So there we can be an enabler. I also think looking far enough in advance, like when the BEAD program first rolled out, we started looking at it and saying some of these requirements just are unworkable. It made sense because what they were trying to do was to create a program where there was enough security for the public funds that if something went awry, they still had a backstop. So, for example,
Mhm.
they created a performance bond or a letter of credit requirement. But when you started talking to the industry and to even the financial markets about it, that they said that's unworkable. Nobody is going to apply for those grants at that level. And
Mhm.
here are the consequences of it, right? And the danger of not leaning into that program at that time is really, it would not have been a successful program because you would not have had the engagement of the providers that would be building the network. So working with the regulators to understand that enabled us to get some waivers and some adjustments to the program that then now you're seeing at the end result is successful in terms of the program rollout and the engagement of providers.
Right. So something that people that are outside of the telecom world, or maybe just not as involved in it as you are, is a common misunderstanding is when infrastructure projects stall, it can be a technical issue. Is there often something more strategic happening behind the scenes that we don't always see from, the outside looking in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When projects stall like that, it's not typically the engineering or the construction. It
Mm-hmm.
really is the behind the scenes, and I like to call it decision latency. So we have decision latency, and what I mean by that is no one wants to say no, and no one wants to say yes either, and so it
Mm-hmm.
gets kicked down the curb for a while. So, for example, a broadband provider might submit a permit to be able to build in a municipality for the construction project. And the application is complex. The design meets the code. It seems to check all the boxes, but it might be that the municipality hasn't addressed one of these in a number of years, right? Because there has not been broadband built out. They don't
Right.
know what to do with it. So they may ask for additional clarification. It may circulate, it may go internally, and then it waits for some sign off. And just the delay of making a decision and moving it forward makes weeks turn into months and delays the project. So the impact in the real world is our crews don't get mobilized, we can't build, equipment orders are delayed. And from my perspective in the grant office, then we are starting to miss our deadlines to our grant offices and to the end users that are waiting for fiber broadband. They've been waiting
Mm-hmm.
for a while and don't understand why they're not getting it, right? So
Right.
nothing's technically wrong. It just might be that there is not the urgency to make the decision, and that becomes the risk. So I don't think it's a failure because of failure to execute. It's timing, it's coordination. It is the entire ecosystem working together to try and resolve those issues.
I love what you said. Decision latency. I think that is, I'm going to use that. That's something I see quite often in this industry, if I'm going to be honest. So a lot of our viewers are engineers, project managers, different infrastructure operators. So their focus is understandably getting the work done.
Yes.
But legal strategy and regulatory awareness can have a huge impact on whether projects are moving forward smoothly, like you just said. And I think that sometimes those considerations don't show up until there's already a problem. So, what's a regulatory or contractual blind spot that you have seen over and over again in infrastructure projects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Abby. I think decision latency, as you mentioned, not only happens externally, right, with agencies that we're working at to try and get the broadband project deployed, but I think it happens internally for our teams
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah.
We're struggling with one right now, I think, as an industry and some of the BEAD requirements. So we now have a BABA requirement. It's a Build America, Buy America requirement, right, where we have to source equipment in the network that is sourced with grant funding under certain requirements as Build America, Buy America equipment. Well, we're actively building networks now, right? So we have all sorts of equipment and trying to understand how we are identifying the equipment that goes to those particular grant locations, how we're tracking it, and then how we're reporting it out at the end is an important compliance requirement. So I think the risk is if we as an industry wait and we go
Mhm.
ahead and start building the networks, and then the
Mhm.
grant office says, oh, what I really meant was I needed this level of documentation, not this level of
Mhm.
documentation. Then we're spending man hours and taking people away from the work of building the network to
Right.
do reports that Pamela is now asking him to do in a fire drill because I didn't ask up front, right? So my inherent push for our teams and for our partners is to say, I need good definitions. I need to understand the compliance requirements up front so that we can design it, because this compliance requirement isn't just a memo, like here's your requirement. It is a workflow, and it has to be built into the workflow so that we have IT systems that are tracking what we're ordering, when we're ordering, and how it gets deployed so that we can report it back on the other end of it. So I guess I would say decision latency shows up in all sorts of different places in our industry.
Yeah.
And my job as a compliance officer is to make sure that we're not waiting on decisions that can be more costly because we waited to implement them versus doing it on the front end to make sure that we've covered it.
Right. I mean, I can imagine that there are moments where you've stepped into a situation and immediately you see something that could have been avoided earlier. That's what it sounds like. Have you ever walked into a situation and you thought, if we had addressed this months ago, we wouldn't be here?
Yes, yes. I have I have early on when we were doing grants, we weren't tracking locations at a BSL level, a broadband serviceable location level, more acronyms, right, that are in the broadband space. But instead, when we were doing grants, the grant offices were saying, hey, please build in this area, and I need you to cover this many addresses. Well, then we get to the end of the project and there wasn't alignment with the grant offices on the exact locations, or things had changed over time. And so I think it's so important. This is one of those communication skills, right? Where you need to be checking in. I know what the grant agreement says. I think I'm technically in compliance, but that isn't what they wanted in the expectation. So continuing to make sure that you are delivering on what was needed. And it is a matter of like staying engaged, making those decisions, making those connections early on so that by the time you get to the end of the project, you've delivered on what they expected you to deliver on.
And on the flip side of that, I would love to hear all the things that go right. Can you share a story that's, on the flip side, where proactive legal strategy actually changed the trajectory of a project?
Yeah, I mean, the letter of credit that I mentioned early on, right, is a good example of that, because had we not had conversations before they got so far down into their program design, you would not have had a successful grant rollout project. But I think at an individual, even smaller level, it is about building that trust and being able to deliver on what they're asking. So I just had a broadband grant office come up to me after a speaking engagement. I was just out talking to all the states that came together to talk about BEAD implementation. And one of them came up to me and said, I just want you to know that your office has been so responsive on the documentations and the requirements that we've asked, and we are now ready to get started. And you're one of the first companies. And I that's a success story for me, right? That we are prepared, we are delivering. And I think it is about building that trust over time. Like we are ready. We have the system set up. We are responding to what you need. We are acknowledging that this is what you need to be able to be successful in partnership with us to deliver something. So I think that's a success story of setting up systems early, and being able to track and respond and deliver when requested.
Yes, I think that says a lot too about the power of communication. But not only that, in order to be able to communicate effectively, like you just said, you have to be coordinated, you have to have a plan and be communicating internally. And that's a lot to coordinate. But the fact that you're doing that, all of these behind the scenes conversations allow these internal conversations, allow your external conversations to move things forward and produce fruit. So that says a lot for you. Absolutely a success.
And it takes a team. I mean, it
Yeah.
takes a team of coordinating the level of data and cross-functional work that we have to do to prepare all the documentation and the data that they need. So, and then deliver on the product. So it's great.
For sure. With that, I want to transition to talking about staying ahead. policy and regulation, they shape so much of what happens in infrastructure. But many people working in the field, they don't often get that same visibility into what policy conversations actually look like, those internal conversations that we're just talking about. And that leads to something I think a lot of infrastructure teams wrestle with, which is compliance, which is what you handle. So my question for you is, how can infrastructure teams start thinking about compliance as a competitive advantage instead?
Yeah, I think, again, shifting the framework instead of seeing compliance as a burden or something that you have to do, to shifting it to seeing it as an enabler for what you are doing is critical and important. And I think the way that Brightspeed has been able to do that is we worked early and often on the grant program. So when we set up the ARPA programs, understanding what those requirements of the program were, and then because we were a new company setting up our systems, to be able to report and track and monitor that in a way that maybe a legacy company didn't have because they had existing systems. So thinking through what the compliance requirements are and then designing the system to be integrated with it. So you have an automation rather than having to throw a lot of people at a compliance kind of issue. I think that's the way to think about it for enablement. And the other is, really understanding the timing and sequencing of your infrastructure projects. So understanding that you may have to get a DOT right of way underground permit, and it's going to take 45 days. And if you want your construction crew working at this period of time, you need to back up and make sure that you're planning to get that in time and being able to track that and stay on top and manage that. So there's a portion of project management that goes into ensuring the compliance milestones are hit in order to achieve your construction schedule.
Makes total sense. Before we wrap up, I always like to zoom out a little bit and talk about the broader perspective people have after spending years in an industry like you have. You wear a lot of different hats. You just said, you do compliance, but even like some project management, you do work with contracts, litigation, advocacy, strategy, all of it. Of all of those roles and those different hats that you wear, which one would you say energizes you the most?
I think it's a mix of all of the above, but it's really a privilege to be a leader of a team, to develop people, to care about them, to encourage them to bring their best selves to work, to have a growth path for them, and to lean in and invest in them. And I think, I mentioned earlier, right? It isn't just me leading this program. It is the team that's surrounding me that enabled a grant office to say, your team delivered on what I needed. And that is such an important role for me, I think, right now where I am. And I really value those connections with people, both within my direct reports, but I also work so cross-functionally with our engineering and construction counterparts, because I would not be successful in the grant program without their ability to build the construction project that I've asked them to build in the timeframe that I've asked them to do it. So for everyone that works with me on the grant programs, I'm just so grateful. And those are the hats that I'm proudest to wear, because I always come back to, what's your why for what you're doing? And my why really is that this really is facilitating people in rural areas, because our footprint is really rural, having the best broadband possible available to them. And we are reaching them in a way that we haven't done in decades. So I'm very excited about the work. I'm proud of the team that we're working on and what we're doing and what we're building.
Yeah, you're so passionate, and I love that, because now I am too. Same thing. I didn't think I'd ever be in this industry, but now that I am, I always say my little slogan is, infrastructure deserves influence.
I love
And
that.
and I think that the public, they rarely get to see the effort that goes into making these systems function, and that may be why it doesn't have the influence that it does. But if you had the opportunity to share one thing with the public, with everyone that you think deserves more appreciation within infrastructure, what would that be for you? What would be your message?
For me, I think it's the unsung heroes, right? It is not
Mm-hmm.
me working in the grant office. It is the people that are out there that are building the networks. It's the people that are coming in after the hurricane to restore service. It is our technicians that are out there saying, oh, people can't charge their phones because they don't have electricity. Let me set up this charging station so people have access and connectivity. It is those engineers that are working in the rural areas around the clock, and it's the public who's waiting somewhat patiently for us to complete our broadband projects while we're working on this ecosystem that seems to be a little bit challenged with capacity constraints, understanding. Maybe your marketing background can help some of our permitting challenges, understanding that we're all in this together to try and get these projects done in a timely fashion to support what we all think needs to happen, which is a more connected nation.
Absolutely. That is the future. And I think everybody knows it. It's just few understand what all is going to go into that actually happening. So again, infrastructure deserves influence. That'll be, I won't say it again, but that's what needs to happen. And then, okay, maybe the most important question to close on, my favorite question. After everything that you have seen in the industry, what still excites you about it?
I think what excites me about it is the opportunity to change hearts and minds that regulation and lawyers aren't just the ones that say no. We might say no, not that way, but let's navigate this way. Let's change this. It's not something to get through. It's something to be designed with. It's something to enable. So when that engineering piece and the compliance piece and the public policy piece and our ecosystem is all aligned, that's when the projects can move faster and the communities can get the benefits they need and our teams stop burning the energy on that avoidable friction or that decision delay, right? And that's when this work becomes so exciting for me to see everybody pulling in the same direction. So it's an opportunity. And it's still a challenge for all of us out there. Maybe it's a call to action for our entire ecosystem to come together to try and push these projects across the finish line.
Yeah, when you just said that, immediately my brain went to, it sounds like your job is a lot of, it's not rejection, it's redirection.
Yes.
And that's more so, I mean, that is a challenge for sure, but you sound like, I mean, you're so passionate about it, which is beautiful. And that's exactly who we need in the role that you have. So thank you for all of your hard work and just caring so much. Before I wrap us up, is there anything that you want to say, last comments or takeaways that you want to give our audience?
I think this is so exciting. I mean, we're at a pivotal time, not just, I'm coming back to BEAD, right? Because that's the big project I'm working on. It is the once in a generation project. But it's not just about the funding or the money. It is an opportunity, I think, for all of us to come together as an ecosystem to prove that we can partner instead of fight one another, that we can align on the strategic objectives, and that we can get these projects done in a shorter time frame than the 4 years that is set out in the program, because people have been waiting for a long time. So I think it's historic, but I think we're all up for the challenge.
I completely agree. Pamela, this has been such an awesome conversation, and infrastructure is one of those industries where the strategy behind the scenes often matters just as much as the work that is happening in the field. I think it completely does. And your perspective really helps illuminate that side of the story. So thank you so much for joining me today and just sharing your insights and what's really going on behind the scenes. It's so important for everybody to know. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Abby.
Of course. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for spending time with us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to Field Notes for more conversations with the people shaping the future of infrastructure. That's it from the field. Stay grounded.